Welcome to the Mindful Runner podcast, a show about running and racing, trail and ultra in South Africa. Along the way, we'll be talking training, gear, nutrition, and mindfulness, all in the context of the South African racing scene. I'm your host, Fred Richardson, founder and head coach at Mindful Runner. Stay tuned as I do my best to give you all the information and none of the waffle. Thanks for joining this one. We're going to look at breaking down running metrics, heart rate, pace, power, and RPE. But I want to talk about them in a broader context, in the context of perfect practice, setting intention, using our focus, and using the metrics to help us become more mindful and get a better effect from our training and our practice. For me, we're not just about the metrics. The metrics are important. They're exceptionally important. But we also want to integrate that science with mindfulness practice. Because ultimately, when you are out there running, and especially on trail, what's happening on your wrist, on this fantastic piece of equipment you have on your wrist, isn't necessarily what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. And so we want to use the tech to help us calibrate the internal machine. So the technology that we're using is, in the way we use it, the technology's job is to help us calibrate the internal machine. And once the internal machine is calibrated, I shouldn't have to use my watch. I shouldn't have to use these specific metrics. So we'll look at getting the metrics dialed in so that you can intuit what your metrics are telling you. So the perfect practice triad for us is intention, focus, and the use of metrics. And I'm going to take a look now at what perfect practice means. And perfect practice is derived from the principle of deliberate practice, right? You've all heard about the 10,000 hour rule. And the phrase deliberate practice was coined by Anders Ericsson, who's a Swedish psychologist. And he wrote this paper called The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance. Now, a lot of the way our workouts are structured, a lot of the use of mindfulness, a lot of the use of our metrics is built around this principle of deliberate practice. I just called it perfect practice because it amounts to us trying to get that perfect run going, that perfect session working. And where these two match up, on the left, we've got deliberate practice. On the right, we've got perfect practice. So the principles that Anderson defined around deliberate practice are goal-oriented and purposeful practice. These are essential if you want to become an expert, right? So goal-oriented and purposeful practice. From a perfect practice point of view, the mindful runner aspect is we set intention for every session. Maybe that's build endurance or improve technique, but every session is goal-oriented and there is a purpose behind every single session. Deliberate practice states we need focused attention. With mindful running, we use focus points like check on your posture, check your breath work, follow your cadence. So we are focusing our attention on the act of running. Deliberate practice says you must have feedback and adjustment. And that's precisely where the metrics come in, right? So the metrics give us the feedback on whether we are executing this run properly, whether we're going fast enough, whether we're using enough power, whether our heart rate's too high, too low, and we adjust as we are going. It's the perfect instructor sitting on your wrist going, you're supposed to be in this heart rate. You're supposed to be running at this pace. So we're getting feedback and we're able to adjust to that feedback as we're going. Deliberate practice says pushing beyond comfort zones. So you really learn best when you just get pushed outside of your comfort zones. Now, from a running point of view, how do we know where your comfort zones are? We know because we set them according to lactate threshold, according to VO2 max. We know that running in your lactate threshold is uncomfortable. We know that running VO2 max is uncomfortable. We know that running for 3 hours at an aerobic pace is uncomfortable. So we are able to say, if we want to push your comfort zone, then If we're doing an endurance run, we push a comfort zone by pushing for 2 hours. If we're doing VO2 max, we go to this level. So pushing beyond comfort zones, we've got metrics to measure against. Deliberate practice says repetition with purpose. With mindful running, we're doing the same workouts often. Like week in, week out, you'll often do the same workouts. If you're in a base phase, you're doing the same workouts, and you are refining your skills as you do those workouts. With running, repetition also improves your running economy, right? The principle of the more you run, the better you get holds absolutely true. But by practicing deliberately, you're gaining more from the run than if you just went out and let your body self-discover. Deliberate practice says we want to be guided by expertise. Now, the expertise is, first of all, you have a description around that workout, what the workout should be. Then we have the metrics that you're going to be running to. And then you have your coach's feedback. Equally important, right, is the feedback you get from your coach to say, this is how your training is going. This is how that workout went. You're feeling this. Perhaps try that. So you're getting feedback also from the experts. Long-term commitment is what deliberate practice says. Perfect practice from the mindful aspect, continuous improvement through cycles of intention, focus, and metrics. So we keep on doing this, and we keep on doing it, and the more we do it, the better we get at it. And then deliberate practice also says you need mental representations. You need to be able to visualize what you're doing in order to do it the best. And on the mindful side, we are working on visualization, we're working on goals, we're working on mindfulness all the time. So that's the visualization process. So that's how we marry up deliberate practice with perfect practice. And remember, deliberate practice is about getting the most effect from your training. It's not just practicing. So if you looked at the examples that were used throughout Anders' book or throughout his paper, they took, for example, music students. And simply having the same amount of hours of work wasn't enough. You needed to have somebody who had followed these principles before they really got good at what they were doing. So 10,000 hours isn't it. It's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice that gets you to become an expert. Okay. Moving forward. So the foundation of perfect practice for us is set the intention. Why are we doing this run? Create those focus points. We want to stay present and mindful in the practice. And then the metrics that we're going to use give us objective feedback to make sure that we're aligning our effort with the goals. And well, I've spoken about setting intention. So what is intention? Intention is this, it's the mental anchor in your session, right? We know, for instance, this particular run, it's an aerobic run, and the intention will be to build endurance. So you can keep on coming back to that. You know why you're doing this run. You're looking to build endurance, or you're looking to improve your running economy. So those are the things that are the bigger goal, right? They help you to align with the long-term goal. Why am I building endurance? Because I want to be an ultra runner. Why am I building speed? Because I want to be a 5K specialist. These things align with your long-term goal, and you need to look at the workout in those contexts. But equally, it needs to be specific and actionable, right? And that means how fast must I run, at what heart rate, for how long. It is very specific and it's actionable. You are going to be able to do this. Those are important for how you set an intention. And then the focus points that we include. Cultivating focus, right? And the importance of this is focus points are going to help us work on things like technique, breath work, mindfulness integration. And the strategies we're going to use for maintaining focus is visualization, it's mantras, it's body awareness. So all of these things come into cultivating that focus and allowing us to get the best we can out of the workout. So the first two legs we have is intention and focus. And now we get to that third leg, the third leg of the triad, and that's the metrics. Now, why do the metrics matter? We want to have objective feedback that's going to allow us to refine our practice. So your watch is objective, right? It's literally giving you the numbers. And if you follow the numbers, you're getting the feedback. If you go quicker, you go slower, you can see what's happening to your heart rate. You shift your hips, you can see what's happening to your power. So you're getting objective feedback. But what we want you to do with that objective feedback is not follow it blindly. You want to enhance your own awareness of what you're doing. So you're running along and you are running to power, for instance, and you notice that your power is a little bit low. And you think about, let me just shift my hips forward slightly. And as you shift your hips forward, the power changes. It's like, oh, wow, okay. And you can play around with that for a bit. Or we're talking about breathing rates, and you slow your breathing rate. You start breathing only through your nose. See how that impacts your heart rate. So there are ways to integrate your body awareness and your self-awareness and your tuning in your intuition to the metrics that you're seeing on your wrist. So the metrics complement the intention and the focus, and they make sure that your effort aligns with the desired outcomes, right? You could, if you wanted to, simply follow the metrics on the watch without any setting intention, setting focus. None of that matters. You could just leave it all out and go, I don't care about any of that. I just want to execute my workout according to my watch. And you still then are working to an objective, you're getting feedback, and you're able to practice this running intuition. So let's look at the metrics that we do use and why we use them, where the shortcomings might be, and where they're really useful. So let's take a look at heart rate. And heart rate it's a physiological response to effort, right? The harder you work, the faster your heart has to beat because the muscles that are working require fuel and they require oxygen. And blood is what carries that oxygen and carries that fuel, and the heart's pumping harder to push blood around the system. So the harder you work, the more blood gets around and the more fuel gets around. So if we use heart rate as a measure, we can see that we work hard, heart rate goes up, I can see it on the watch. What we tend to do is we don't work to a maximum heart rate. You'll see a lot of people talk about working to maximum heart rate. We don't work to a maximum heart rate, we work to a threshold heart rate. And the reason behind not working to a maximum heart rate is really simple. If you've ever done a maximum heart rate test, they are hard, really hard. And if we had to do a maximum heart rate test every second or third month or every month, people would hate us because it's such a hard thing to do. So we do threshold heart rate tests. And threshold heart rate is pretty much the speed that you would be able to run at for between 40 minutes and an hour, the maximum pace that you would be able to run at for that 40 minutes to hour gap. And we say 40 minutes to an hour because it depends on your level of fitness, it depends on your genetics, there's a number of things that come into it, but it's a hard run for between 40 minutes and an hour. That will give us a threshold heart rate and a threshold pace, right? You're going to run on a flat course. The test is simple. You run for 30 minutes as hard as you can, and we take the last 20 minutes, and that sets a threshold heart rate. It's only 30 minutes, so it's a whole lot easier than doing a max heart rate test. Also, threshold heart rate it's trainable, right? Maximum heart rate is not trainable, so there's nothing we can work to there. But threshold heart rate is trainable, and it will move. It will improve as you get fitter. It gets better. So as your fitness improves, so we can see the threshold heart rate improving, so we can make your workouts more and more difficult. Difficult is perhaps the wrong phrase, but more challenging, right? So now where your recovery zone was at maybe 130 beats and below that was your recovery zone, now as you are getting fitter and you've shifted that threshold heart rate, your recovery zone is now maybe 139 beats. Okay, so it will shift and it will improve as you get better. I think that's all I want to say about threshold heart rates at this point. There'll be a lot of time for questions, so you guys can ask questions afterwards. But that's good enough around threshold heart rate. Okay, let's look at the much more traditional metric that's been around forever, long before heart rate monitors or anything else, right? And that's pace. Straight up pace. Understand that pace is a relative indicator. It might be absolute if you're running around a track, but the impact of terrain, of weather, of fatigue, all of those things play into making pace not the most accurate measure. As the terrain changes, so your pace is going to change. It's not necessarily a measure of effort. Okay, that's what I'm talking about when I say it's not that accurate. It's not a measure of effort, and so we need to be able to take some things into account. And right now, on your watches, on these sophisticated pieces of tech on your wrist, you have either it's called NGP or it's called GAP. Right? NGP is normalized graded pace, and GAP is a grade adjusted pace. I think Garmin and Strava use GAP. Training Peaks uses NGP. But what that is it's an adjusted pace to tell you what your speed would have been if you were running on the flat. So it takes grade into account, hence grade adjusted pace or normalized graded pace. It takes the gradient into account. And it's pretty accurate, probably up to about 12%. GAP and NGP are pretty accurate. Beyond that, the accuracy tends to be less, but still a good measure. Now, on the latest versions of the Garmin's, and if you can use Training Peaks on the Suntos, you're able to use gap pace on your watch to monitor your running. So when you go on a trail run and you're running up a hill, you can run on gap pace. And the practical way that you use this is, let's assume that we said your run tomorrow has to be at 6 minutes a K. If you are going to run in very hilly terrain and you choose to use gap, then you just make sure your gap pace is at 6 minutes a K. As you're going downhill, it's going to go down to 5:20. As you go uphill, it's going to go up to 7:10. Your actual running pace will be 5:10 down the hill, 7:10 up the hill. But your gap pace will remain at 6 if you can maintain the effort properly. So you focus on gap pace and ignore what the actual pace is. That's how we're going to use pace within your workouts. When you're running trail, NGP and GAP are relatively good measures. Okay, but remember that there are many other factors that come into it. Okay. The next metric that we use is power. Now, a lot of the modern watches, I say modern watches, new generation of watches, like those that have come out in the last year or two, have integrated power on the wrist. It used to be that we had to buy power pods, put them on our shoes to run with a power pod. But nowadays, you have power on your wrist. The benefits of running on power is that power is instant. The response to power is instantaneous. So as you accelerate, so the power changes on your watch. If you think about pace, what's happening with pace on a GPS watch, you need to run about 50 meters probably before average pace is showing up on your watch, because it's a GPS measuring every 1 second, it's pinging and it's going to, you travel this far, therefore that's your average pace. Whereas power is telling you right now what the power is you put out. So power is instantaneous. So when you're looking at short intervals, 10-second intervals, 20-second intervals, anything up to about probably 5 minutes, power is the better measure because it's so quick, you can see exactly what's going on. And in the example I used earlier, you can definitely see when you change posture, when you change stride length, when you change how you step up, how you step off, you can see that impact on power. So you're getting very quick feedback from the watch. Now, with trail running, obviously, that lends itself much more to the terrain you're running on, right? It is terrain neutral to some extent. If you are on very technical terrain where you've got a lot of rocks and a lot of stepping up and down, I wouldn't use power much. We're still then going to go, look, just focus on effort, and we'll talk about effort shortly. But again, that gradient of up to about 12% on a relatively smooth trail, not a very technical trail, but relatively smooth trail, terrain, neutral feedback comes from your watch. So you get the power, and as long as your power is within your training range, you're good to go, right? That's covering power. Now let's talk about RPE. And RPE is the rate of perceived exertion. And this is what we ultimately are trying to get to. We want to get ourselves to RPE, to an understanding of our own bodies such that we don't need the fancy piece of tech on our wrists, that we can run without the watch. The first line is RPE is the subjective experience of effort. So you're taking into account the weather, you're taking into account your internal heating. Your body is taking a lot of stuff, a lot of signals in. And for a lot of people, RPE is the ultimate measure. It's better than a watch because it is taking in a lot of stuff that the watch can't necessarily factor in. The warning around RPE is it's heavily influenced by mindset, right? So if you turn up in a negative frame of mind or you turn up stressed, the perception of effort is going to be higher than if you turn up relaxed. I've spoken before about various experiments that have been done. As an example, two groups of people. One group were given a psychological test, an actual written test to write that was really difficult, stressed them out a lot. The other group was given Nature Channel to watch, National Geographic on TV. They then take both those groups after an hour and they put them onto stationary bikes and they have them ride for as long as they can at a particular power. And the guys who are on the stationary bikes who watch the Nature Channel will repeatedly outdo the guys who came in stressed. So RPE is heavily influenced by your stress levels. Okay. And as long as you're aware of that, and you've got the techniques and the tips and the tricks on how to get yourself back into that positive frame of mind and work with your RPE, then it remains the best measure. And it is the one we want to work towards. So our ultimate goal is to do away with the watches completely and just run on RPE. It's called at the expert level, right? Along the way, we're going to use the metrics again and again and again. And sometimes you will be in a space where you are running purely on RPE and you have been for quite a while and you're very comfortable. And you put a watch on and you run at a pace that you think is a tempo run. And your watch says, no, that's not tempo, that's easy. Or, no, that's not aerobic, that's way too fast. So it is worthwhile every now and then coming back to the watch, coming back to the metrics, checking in and going, okay, I think I'm running at a 5 out of 10, but actually I'm now running at, according to my heart rate, I'm running at a 7 out of 10. So we keep on using the watches to help refine our metrics. Now, the way that we apply these metrics within the training environment, within training peaks, on your watches, we define training zones, right? And the training zones are meant to help you ensure that you're in the right space. That's the range. From here to there, 150 to 170, that's the range I want you in. Pace-wise, 610 to 720, that's the pace range I want you in. Okay? But what we can do is we can set up these physiological zones, and it just makes it easier when you're training. When you're looking at your watch, take a look at, as long as you're in the red or in the green or in the blue or in the yellow, you're in the right space. We need to set those up specific to the individual. So you need to do some sort of threshold test. Again, the high-end watches now are already incorporating your threshold values, and they're already estimating your fitness levels, and they are automatically creating these training zones for you. Typically, what happens is with the watches is we're looking at a 5-zone model, right? And that is recovery, and aerobic space, tempo, threshold, and VO2 max. You'll notice that these 5 definitions all go around aerobic training, because they basically come out of heart rate, right? Remember that you can run faster than your VO2 max for 10 seconds, for 20 seconds, for 90 seconds. You can run quicker than your VO2 max. So, and heart rate is not involved there. Okay, so these models are all based around heart rate. There is a 3-zone model, which is the simplest way to look at things, right? And a 3-zone model, we have low intensity, we have moderate intensity, and we have high intensity. And typically, we're going to be looking, certainly from the Mindful Runner point of view, but I think most coaching organizations are now running around an 80-20 model. So 80% in that low intensity zone and 20% in that high intensity zone. The middle zone at moderate intensity, that's where you want to be racing. You don't want to spend much time training there. You'll spend some time training there, but it'll be a small amount. But that is your race zone. There is a thing around RPE. Well, not a thing around RPE. There's a thing called ventilatory threshold. And the ventilatory threshold, or VT1, happens at exactly that point, right? It happens at the crossover between low and moderate. And you'll be able to know by your breathing rate whether you are crossing this boundary. So you're running along, and under normal circumstances, if you're running easy, if you can breathe through your nose even, you hardly notice your breathing. It's conversational, right? You can chat. You don't even notice the fact that you're breathing. When you cross over into moderate intensity, you cross that ventilatory threshold, you'll notice rhythmic breathing. It might not be very deep, but it is rhythmic, right? You can't just relax. And if you play around with that in your next endurance run, play around with that, right? Go a bit quicker, a bit slower, run to where you're not noticing your breathing, pick up the pace, and you'll notice the breathing again. And that is the ventilatory threshold. That's also the point at which your lactate threshold, or your lactic acid, starts to accumulate, so that eventually, at a point, it's going to accumulate to such an extent because you can't clear enough that you're going to stop running. The second ventilatory threshold, or VT2, sits at the top of the moderate zone. Okay, and this is where breathing becomes almost ragged. If you have run here, it almost feels desperate, right? Where you think, if I'm running in the red, man, that is hard work. I'm almost just gasping. Dial it back slightly, and it's still rhythmic. It's deep, and it's hard, and it's forced, but I can control it. Step over into this high intensity zone, and it's really, I have to work to breathe. So again, on your next tempo run, play around in this space. Just comfortably hard to almost uncomfortably hard to, holy cow, this is difficult. I'm really having difficulty breathing. That's ventilatory threshold 1, VT1. That's where you want to be doing most of your zone 1 training. That is the comfortable zone 1. And zone 2 sits out. VT2 sits out here. And most of the 5-zone models will split up this moderate intensity training into tempo running and sub-threshold running, or steady state runs, but it's a mix inside here. Okay. Hope that helps understand the zones. It does make a big difference to set the zones properly on your watch. Because when you're watching the watch, it's a whole lot easier if it's just showing you red, green, orange. You know you're in the right space. Check in with your coach, get your lactate threshold and set that. Almost all the watches will take a lactate threshold and set your lactate threshold zones so you're training to the same zones as we expect from Training Peaks. With the Training Peaks workouts we send you, they are going to have specific values on your watch, but it does help if they align with your Garmin values or your Suunto values or your Chorus values. Okay. So that's going through the metrics. And if we look at how we integrate that triad, that intention, focus, metrics, those are the things we want to be using. So begin with the intention of the workout. Understand what it is that I'm doing. Understand why I'm doing it. Understand how it fits into the big picture of my training. Take those focus points as I'm executing the run and stay mindful of my focus and validate and adjust with my metrics. Am I on the right zone? Am I running in the right space here? This is supposed to be a long run. I'm focusing on staying aerobic. Am I supposed to be in zone 1? What's my RPE supposed to be? So tempo run, take a look at your power metrics, focus on your breathing. As we spoke about now, use breathing as a mechanism to help you calibrate what you're doing. Okay, so typically we use heart rate, pace, power, RPE at different times in somebody's training plan. Certainly at the beginning of people's training plans, we will use RPE, because if you're coming in and you're not fit, then RPE is by far the best measure to use. Heart rate will be exaggeratedly high very often. So we would use RPE for newer runners or for runners who are coming back from injury. If you've been off for more than 2 or 3 months, we definitely use RPE in the beginning. As you start to get fitter during the base phase, then we start focusing on heart rate. Anything up to 2 hours, heart rate still works. Where heart rate starts to fall down is when the internal heating of your muscles starts to, first of all, thicken. Well, you start to perspire because of the internal heating. You start to perspire. That's losing plasma out of your blood. Your blood gets thicker. Your heart has to work harder. And there is a deflection point, which we talk about, where you will see, if you're running at a constant pace and heart rate on a graph will run parallel. At the point at which heart rate deflects away, it's called the heart rate deflection point. That's the point at which your internal systems are no longer coping with the effort level, and that heart rate deflects. And ultimately, as ultra runners, what we want to do is we want to move that heart rate deflection point further and further and further along, right? So initially, you're a new runner, you've got an hour's run, your heart rate deflection might happen at 40 minutes. And as you get better, your heart rate deflection moves further and further out. So there's less and less change. Eventually, you get to an hour's run, and you will see no change. Well, not no change, less than 5%. So that's what we're looking for. And there's a measure inside of Training Peaks in which we can see when somebody is aerobically conditioned for the distance that they're doing and the effort level they're doing. So as long as you're running on the same course for the same amount of time, we can see improvements on that. And that's another reason why maybe every Tuesday is your long run, or every Sunday is your long run, because we want to be able to see the same workouts happening at the same time, the same kind of distance, so we can see progress. So if you're seeing regular workouts of the same kind of thing, there's good reason behind that as well. So we can see as you move that deflection point further and further away, so you're getting fitter aerobically, until we reach a point where maybe you do a 2-hour run and really you're staying under 5% on deflection. And then it's time to say, okay, cool, now we need to focus on different areas because you have tapped out your aerobic capacity at this point, and now we can work on other things, right? So heart rate is an important measure during base building. Once we start moving into race preparation, and especially things like road running, and when somebody comes along and says, I want to run a 10K in 40 minutes, you've defined what you want to be measured by, right? 40 minutes is pace. Almost exclusively pace. And then we would train to pace. So first we do the base building. That would be RPE and heart rate. Then during race preparation, we go, okay, you have a time target. We're going to train to pace. We might train to power because we're getting more instant results during the power training. But it's also going to depend on what you will use during your race to measure by. Right? Nobody's ever going to say to you, what was your power output for your marathon? They want to know what your time was for your marathon. So pace is what we care about when we are training and when we're racing for road events. For trail events and trail preparation, even during base phase, power is a very useful measure. It's a very useful way of establishing whether we're getting an even effort on the ups and the downs. Now, the warning is on very technical downhills, ignore power. You're probably going to end up breaking your neck if you try and run to power on a very steep technical downhill. Just ignore it. Turn off the fact that you're running to power and control your run. So there are different times to use different measures, but always we want you to understand what the perception of effort should be for this run so that you are able to say, I'm calibrating. I'm using the technology to calibrate. And the last metric, which we haven't discussed at all, but which is extremely useful, both from our perspective as coaches, but also your perspective when you're looking back historically on your own running, and when you're looking for trends, is using the smileys. Okay? The use of the smileys, let me tell you how I would use the smileys typically. I'm somebody who's very optimistic, so I tend to have almost every run is excellent and a big smile. But then I have a not so good run and I just call it very good. And if I'm reading my own feedback and I look at that and I go, okay, very good is, it's a 4 out of 5. So I was feeling a bit bad there. And if I see that over consecutive days, or I just go to, it was good, then there's a problem coming, right? And it's something to pay attention to. If we are busy with race preparation phase, and I know the next 2 weeks are supposed to be hard, and Mark is giving me smiley faces for every single run, there's a problem. We're not pushing hard enough. Remember, one of those principles behind perfect practice is just to push the envelope, to challenge the system. So if you're constantly giving smiles, you're not getting challenged. And we're in a challenging phase of training. The smileys are important. So keep on using the smileys. They will pay off for all of us, actually, coaches and athletes. Okay, let's talk about the pitfalls. And maybe I've alluded to them, maybe not, but don't get over-reliant on the metrics. They're important from a training point of view. On the day, on race day, we're going to determine which metrics you use to establish your pacing. But other than that, when you're racing, get out of the way of the metrics. Try and run purely on feel. Run on your RPE. It's the best possible way to race, especially if you're racing longer distances or you're racing for a longer time, right? More than 2 hours, more than 3 hours. You want to be running on how hard does this feel rather than, oh, my watch says I should speed up or my watch says I should slow down. So we want to avoid over-reliance on the metrics. The goal is not to run to the watch. The goal is to replace the watch with your own internal intuition being better than the watch. Common mistakes, and we will all together work on avoiding them, and that's chasing the numbers over consistency, right? I would rather have you slow down on a run than you're feeling bad today, and you're supposed to be running at 6 minutes a K, but you're really feeling rough. But you know that you have to run at 6 minutes a K. So you run at 6 minutes a K. Tomorrow you're sick because you insisted on overriding your body's signals. You went, no, I don't trust you. I trust the watch. And you ran to the watch. So rather dial it back and go, no, I didn't feel good. So I rather slow down, because then tomorrow you'll be able to turn up for tomorrow's run. You won't be overdoing things, but just chasing the numbers. And then don't neglect the mindfulness in favor of the data. Don't neglect that plugging into your internal intuition is the primary thing. Trust your intuition. That's what I've just said now as well. If you're feeling bad, you think you should dial back the run, do it. Dial back the run. Okay. So never neglect how you're feeling to what the data is showing you. We're going to look at. Of course, there are times, and we say this often, there are times when your internal intuition is just being a bit of a sissy, right? And you got to learn to distinguish between when you're being a sissy and when you're being conservative. And we'd rather have you be conservative, but understand that sometimes you're going to have to crack your own whip to ensure that you don't wimp out of a hard workout, or you don't bail from something that looks particularly tough. Okay. And that is it, Tim. Let's take questions. I think, yeah, we got questions. As always, thank you for listening. If you want to know more about Mindful Runner, check us out at mindfulrunner.co.za. On Instagram, you can find us at Mindful Runner. In the meantime, enjoy your running, happy trails, and don't forget to subscribe.